the background of this, it certainly appears that what David is asking is, tell me how mighty I am. Tell me how strong my kingdom is. Tell me how big my army is. And what's the problem with that? You read the rest of the story, and God announces judgment on the nation for David's sin. What's the problem with that? Here's the problem. Who is to be David's warrior? It's God. We read it on Monday. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. The battle is not ours. It is God's. And why is that such a sin for David? Because David knew better. David was one day that shepherd boy willing to take on the giant because God fought for him. Now he's the king talking about his own force. And I want you to hear the problem. And I particularly want to talk to the men in this room for just a minute. I want you to see what happens when David is young and he's inexperienced and he's untrained. He's willing to trust God to do whatever. But then he grows up. He gets some training under his belt. He gets some power. And he becomes the king. And when he becomes the king, it's no longer about trusting God. It's about figuring out just how strong he is. So often that happens to us. Man, in fact, we live in a world that pushes us that way. That we are raised to think about our kingdom, our plans, our goals, our power. And if we're not careful, those of us who learn to trust God as young believers somehow grow up and we grow out of our dependence on God. And I want to say to you men, we desperately need men to go to the mission field. We desperately need young men to lead the way to touch the nations. And as God is calling you out, the tension will be, the enemy will say, but it's not about the nation, it's about you. It's about your kingdom. It's about your goals. It's about your plans. In fact, that's why you're at Union University, to get equipped, to get trained, to do whatever you want to do, to gain your stuff, to build your kingdom. And I'm telling you, God's not looking for men who are building their own kingdom. God's looking for men who are willing to say before God's eyes, I'm only a shepherd boy. He's looking for men who are willing to say, I'm going to lay every ounce of this down. And if God calls me to go against a giant with just a sling and some rocks, I will do it for God's glory. And men, I plead with you. I plead with you. The toughest men I know, the most powerful men I know, are not the men growing their own kingdom. They are the men who are saying, my life is God's. And if that's okay. Because it's the boys willing to go into the battle for God's glory that the world sees and says there must be a God in Israel. So I pray that for all of you. That God would call you into a situation that you cannot handle. And the best you can say is, I can't do it. I don't know how it will happen. And then here's what you do. Let God fight the battle. And let the nations hear. Got it? Let's pray that God would do that. Almighty Father,